Hey, this is The Intersection where faith, life, and culture meet. I'm Eric Targe.
And I'm Justin May, and oh man, we are ecstatic,
Psyched.
just super freaked out about our next guest. Dr. Russell Moore is a name that you probably know pretty well, but if you've been under a rock and you don't, Dr. Moore is a preacher. He's a theologian. He is the president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Council, the public policy arm for the Southern Baptist Convention. You know him from just everywhere and all sorts of stuff in television. Please welcome Dr. Moore to the intersection.
Oh, thanks for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Dr. Moore, we're continuing a series right now called Life and Breath, looking at humanity at the margins. And as I think about that and what it means to be an advocate for humanity at the margins, you are someone that so often comes to mind, who has modeled that so well. And can I say, when we got your latest book, The Courage to Stand, you can hold it, Justin. When we got this latest book, I love that it tells your story. It tells your story of advocacy. It tells your story of writing. And it's a book, let me just say, that every Christian should get a hold of. I was saying before, so many books, they joke, they're like, oh, it made me laugh, it made me cry. This is a book that literally Justin and I were reading across the office, socially distanced, reading, and we had moments together where we chuckled, and then we both had a collective sigh at the same time.
Very masculine sigh.
It was a masculine sigh.
Very masculine sigh.
But it was a sigh in that introduction where we were just so moved. And if you want to know Dr. Moore's heart, you gotta get this book. But let me get to you. We have questions for you, so many. Rather than talk about the book, we want you to talk about the book. So, Dr. Moore, as you were thinking about this, as you were thinking about The Courage to Stand, I thought it was really interesting that you chose to focus on the biblical character of Elijah for this book. Why Elijah?
But two reasons. I mean, one of them is if you look at Elijah in the Bible, he's everywhere. You have him all through the prophets. There's just this drumbeat. Elijah is coming before the day of the Lord. And then you go into the New Testament and it's the spirit of Elijah. And when is Elijah coming? And so forth. But also because I think sometimes we pay attention when we've been wrong about somebody. There are all sorts of people where I've sort of thought one way about them, and then something happens, and I realize, wait a minute, I really measured them up in the wrong way. And that was certainly the case for me with Elijah, because Elijah was always kind of an intimidating figure because he seemed to be somebody who is just full strength power, call down fire from heaven and go out in a whirlwind of fire, sort of a figure. And what I saw when I spent a lot more time with Elijah is that the hinge point for his life wasn't in any of those moments of great triumph. It was when he was off in the wilderness, trekking out toward the mountain, and he was at his point of most weakness and loneliness and almost kind of a whining figure sometimes, saying to God, why is all of this happening to me? And the more that I looked at that, the more I realized that's actually carrying the cross. And that's exactly what Jesus says is going to happen in the life of every believer. And so it really helped me to reframe how I was looking at fear and courage and so forth, because I think we're in a moment where a lot of what we see as courage is really just image maintenance, where we feel as though we have to pretend to be brave or pretend to be winning in order to make it so. And that's just not the biblical picture of courage at all.
That's a super good catchphrase. I like that.
Yeah.
Man. That's pithy.
That's tweetable.
That's very tweetable. That's a good tweet. So you talk about courage, right? I mean, it's in the title of the book. There's this great anecdote you share in the first chapter about Mark Twain. And when I think about Mark Twain, I think about his context. It's not that dissimilar from ours. Post-Civil War, America was extremely bitterly divided. Everybody's very, very hostile to dissenting opinion. There is no middle ground. You're either the good guy or the devil, regardless what side you're on. Um, given given that we have this very similar context, I thought it was a good anecdote about Mark Twain having these strong convictions about a political issue, and he gets up to speak in front of a hostile crowd and just completely chickens out and absolutely does not say anything. What do you say to somebody in 2020, since you can't talk to anybody in the 1870s? What do you say to somebody in 2020 who fears speaking up about
Hmm.
matters of conscience and things that they feel they ought to speak up about?
Well, I think that the danger is when you look at what Mark Twain is calling moral courage as opposed to physical courage. I think the danger is not just the failure to speak out. I think it's also the reverse of that. So I think all the time about C.S. Lewis saying that the devil doesn't send errors into the world one by one, but two by two on either side of what God has created. And so I think for some people, a lack of moral courage is going to be seen in kind of withdrawing and maybe you're a teenager and you're in your school and there's a kid who's being bullied and you kind of don't associate with that kid for fear of being lumped in with him or her. That's one way that a lack of moral courage can show up. On the other hand, though, it can show up in a kind of quarrelsomeness and fighting, what Paul calls an unhealthy craving for controversy. That really is the same thing. It's self protection. It's
Hmm.
trying to sort of deal with people before they deal with you, and neither of those things are healthy or right.
Hmm. That's such a good word because I think in those formative years, like speaking to the high school student who's watching this video, those formative years are so important. I've been recently reading a biography about Theodore Weld because we just named our new son after him. We named him Theodore, and you see that so early in his life there was that key moment where he decided to stand up for and become friends with a black student in his school, and if he didn't, he said that his whole life would have been different because it was that ostracism that helped him to say no, 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 this was right. And so it's such a good word to parents to not let those little moments go by. Encourage your children to stand now.
Well, and also there was a study done not long ago about middle school and about those middle school years, which I paid attention to. Somebody who's the dad of middle schoolers and former middle schoolers, and I remember saying to one of my sons at one point, "Look, this is just a hard time. There are some people who are nostalgic for high school. There's nobody who's nostalgic for middle school. It's rough for everybody." But what I saw in this study was the person who was doing it said the real trouble is that middle school actually doesn't end,
Mm.
because in some ways all of those same dynamics are at work all of life, of saying,
Yes.
how are people viewing me, where do I fit in with the group, all of those things, they're still there. We just learn how to pretend our way through them a little bit better, and I think that's exactly right.
Mm. Dr. Moore, jumping off that, in your chapter on justice in this book, one of the things you talked about is how sometimes there's, and when you wrote it, I was like, yes, there sometimes is this kind of fear of speaking out, this fear of being courageous, because we tell ourselves, we say, well, if I stay in this structure, if I stay in this organization, then I could have influence in the long run, and so it's best to keep my mouth shut so that I can say something later. And I know that there's so many instances where that is wrong, where you need to speak up, you need to say, no, I'm going to make the change now. But are there cases where Christians should just hold their tongue in the face of injustice? Are there times where they should say, okay, I'm going to make this change down the road?
I think if you look at what's happening in the life of Jesus, one of the things that's remarkable is how complicated Jesus is in terms of his reactions to various things. So there are going to be some times when Jesus is coming in immediately into some area of controversy. Usually, it's he's creating a controversy that doesn't previously exist. Then there are other times when he's going to kind of reframe the question. And then there are going to be other times when he doesn't engage with it at all. Now, obviously, we don't have the wisdom of Christ in the exact same way, or the presence of the Spirit in the exact same way. But I think that's the case. I don't think it's ever the case where a Christian ought to adjust himself or herself to injustice.
Hmm.
But I think there are going to be times when we hit it in different ways. So I've been thinking a lot about. There was somebody that was a member of a church I served one time, whose life was a wreck. I mean, go on Dr. Phil type wreck.
Okay.
And I was trying to help him through it, and I just wasn't getting anywhere. And so I talked to this older, wiser man in the faith and said, what do I do with this guy? And he said, I'll bet that his checking account is a wreck. Why don't you teach him how to manage his checking account? And I said, his checking account, that's the least of his problems. And this guy said, exactly. It's the least of his problems. He said, but what you're getting at right now is too big. So he's just overwhelmed, and he doesn't even know where to start. But if you
Hmm.
start on something a little bit smaller, and teach him how to sort of cultivate the instincts that he needs, then you can move outward from that. Sometimes that's going to be the case, but I think the danger is, what we always want to do is to sort of convince ourselves that whatever we want to do is for some higher purpose. So if you look, for instance, at the pastors in the Jim Crow South, one of the things that you can see is that often you would have pastors who actually didn't hold the segregationist or racist views of their people, but they would say to themselves, well, if I engage that issue, then they're just going to get rid of me and they're going to replace me with somebody else. And so I'm just going to conserve my influence.
Hmm.
Well, the problem is that was the moment when they needed to stand up for what was right, and that conserving of the influence just meant that they kind of adjusted their own consciences. And I think that can happen. It can happen on a church staff, where you've got some, awful things going on. You're able to say, well, but we can just kind of cover this up. Or it can happen in a workplace. It can happen in a family dynamic, in all sorts of ways, which is why I think we need other people to be involved with us to help us to kind of check what our motives are.
Hmm.
It's man, there's a lot to unpack there. I actually
Yeah.
really, this is where my brain went. Okay, you're going to address the guy's checkbook problem, and it's like, oh, we're doing like a Dave Ramsey debt snowball, but for your messed up life. Like, oh, we'll do the little thing and do the bigger. Like, that's just super practical.
Yeah.
Um, I have to ask. So, you are a public figure, and as a public figure, other people may not know this. Public figures do get a lot of criticism
Yes.
and a lot of flack. Like on Twitter, man, people, supposed Christians, say and do a lot of really messed up things because they disagree with something that you said or did. How has your kind of being at this lightning rod type position influenced the writing of this book? Like, is that a major factor in it? Was it just an
No,
afterthought?
because I don't really know about any of that. I mean, I'm
Oh, I'm
really
sorry to
not.
bring that in. I'm sorry. There's
I
yeah. Don't look on the internet.
No, I
So
mean, I don't think that. I'm not really a public figure. I am in terms of what I do, but I'm not in terms of who I am. And
Hmm.
so the audience that I care about, my family, my friends, people like that, those are the things that I pay attention to. And I really don't think that anybody in any area of leadership, no matter what it is, can spend a lot of time sort of going through and saying, what is every audience thinking about me at this moment? I mean, what that leads to is ultimately paralysis. What somebody has to do is to say from the very beginning, who are the people whose wisdom I would go to anyway if I were in trouble and I wanted to find out what should I do. Okay, cultivate those relationships and listen to those people, but don't get into a situation where you're just listening to whatever random voices there are. I had a pastor friend who called me one time and said, uh, I'm going to leave because I've got this group of people in my congregation that are, everything that I do, they're, second guessing, they're doing psychological warfare, the typical things. Some people are concerned. And so he was going to leave. And I
Oh,
said, how many people are you talking about? And he said, it's maybe 5% of the congregation. And I said, well, why would you abandon 95% of the people uh, who are who are there being you're ministering to and serving because of 5% of the people who are trying to sort of mess with your mind so that you can move down the road for another 5% of people. That's not just an issue for people who are in sort of pastoral ministry or what have you. It's really the situation for everybody. I was talking to a small group leader in a church just yesterday who was saying, what do I do? It's so discouraging for me to go on Facebook and see what the people in my church, the members of my small group, the way that they're acting on Facebook with one another. And it just causes me to say, am I just failing in discipling these people?
mm,
And my counsel to him was to say, I think you're going to find it easier to love the people in your congregation if you're actually not looking at what's happening on Facebook,
mm,
because what you see happening there is almost like starlight that's coming to you long after the star is there. It's way downstream from whatever's happening in their life, and you can actually hit better that discipleship at the formative way if you don't uh, know everything that's going on in terms of how they're doing that on Facebook. I think for most people that's generally the frame to be in.
Dr. Moore, this time has been so incredibly valuable, and I wish we had so much more time to delve into this book and to your words for the person seeking to be courageous. And maybe one of those big takeaways is stop reading your newsfeed.
Yeah.
The
Man.
newsfeed can be such the thing. I think what you just said, like some people are concerned. I think that's probably a phrase that anyone who's been at least a week in the ministry has heard, right? And Facebook has just given Facebook, Twitter, all these things has just given a megaphone to the one person so that they can say that they're the 95%, right? Such a good word.
Yeah, Dr. Moore, thank you so much for being here. Really excited to talk to you again. Hey, foreshadowing.
Yep, in a couple of weeks.
In a couple of weeks,
adoption.
that's right.
So thank you for joining us. If you liked this video or this podcast, would you do us a quick favor? Press subscribe, give us a like, give us 5 stars, say something nice about, if you can't think of anything nice to say about us, say something nice about Dr. Moore. I mean,
Sure.
This was awesome.
Yeah. And in the comments section, this is since we're talking about courage, it's a great place to list all of your deepest, most intimate fears. And I'm sure the people will be nice to you on the internet about it. Hey.
Thanks for joining us, Dr. Moore.